What's going on, boys? It's your boy, captivated or captivized by FI here. We are talking mostly about ISTJ Fi today, although we will be discussing INTJs and other lower Fi types. After spending a lot of time on NTJs, I'm becoming more and more interested in STJs, particularly in the ways they grapple with FI. SIFI looks a lot different from NIFI. We'll start with the reminder most STJs are introspective. What differentiates them and their introspection from NTJs and FPs is the presence of SI. When an NTJ or an SFP grapples with FI, you are going to see it. They might not talk about it, but you will see the dust they kick up in their grappling, which we'll get to. And when an NFP grapples with FI, they have the higher NE, lower SI framework to jump rails internally and contort their mind and prior understandings of things to accommodate their introspection. It might not always be pretty and it might spill out of their mouths, but this is what they do. This is their work. They have the tools to manage FI. STJs are a bit different, particularly introspective ISTJs with tertiary FI. Juggling these is a little difficult, please bear with me. ESTJs, they might actually be, in theory, the type best equipped to manage FI productively. They have tertiary NE. They enjoy mental gymnastics. If FI starts acting up, as it does, they aren't going to run off on a soul-searching retreat. When an ENTJ has FI troubles, they are going to start crying one day and they won't know why. They're going to ignore it until they can't. They're going to break down, and then they are going to either spend a lot of money and ingest many substances, or they are going to try some unplugging maneuver, some getting back in touch with themselves and nature thing, and then go on a month-long hike into the middle of nowhere and hope FI works itself out in the meantime. And to be fair, many times it does. I still don't understand how it works. I'm assuming it has something to do with tertiary SE, but once an ENTJ goes on a spiritualism bender, or a bender, they often come back refreshed and reoriented. And if those strategies work, then they're good strategies, but they can be disruptive for the ENTJ and the people around them. ESTJs are different. When FI starts invisible hands strangling them, they are pretty good at diagnosing and managing the problem. And I think tertiary NE has everything to do with that. They are more than happy either to rearrange their shelf without putting any new books on it, which I think is what most STJs do, which is why they get a bad rep fairly, but maybe a little bit unfairly, because if most people are bad and most males are STJs, ESTJs, you're going to see a lot of the bad and not so much of the good. Even though there are phenomenal ESTJs out there, which leads us to, or they grow multiple extra limbs and grab as many sources of information, old and new, multimedia, from their history and from something completely different, and then ingest everything, information and perspectives, until they have a framework to reorient themselves in a new direction instead of just jumbling, rejumbling what they're already dealing with and then telling themselves it's okay. I like visualizing SE as a net. You go out into the world and you catch as many things as possible. And I like visualizing NE as a figurative net or a double figurative net, catching as much information as possible. Both functions gather information, but SE seems more. It's hard to explain. I'm still struggling with SE, but the way I see SE is things as they are plus an X factor non SE types don't understand. Whereas any devours tidbits of information until, or maybe not until, it gathers tidbits of information and then throws them into a taffy puller almost until something cohesive gets weaved. Anyway, from what I've seen, most ESTJs won't do much with FI, or at least not much internal building, because if your materialism framework is still producing and you can fool your internal screaming with well jingled keys, why wouldn't you manage that voice in that way? And then the minority of ESTJs who are not just introspective, but working on themselves, and not just working on themselves in the way people say they're working on themselves to say they're working on themselves, to feel like they're working on themselves without really getting anywhere, actually working on themselves, they are superhumans. They are equipped, interested, and able to bring in lots of new information, use that information to diagnose and then generate a solution for an internal problem, and then adapt accordingly. Now, ISTJs are different, and there's much more nuance with their FI troubles. Now, if you'll bear with my gushing for a moment, I'm beginning to like ISTJs a lot the more I interact with them. Firstly, as with INTJs, ISTJs cannot ignore FI, but unlike INTJs, ISTJs lead with SI, meaning ISTJs tend not to cause me as many problems or headaches as INTJs do. Now, I like INTJs and I'm beginning to like them more too, but holy shit, inferior SE is a nightmare to deal with in conjunction with tertiary FI. ENTJs binge verb to deal with their FI troubles, tertiary SE, and typically they are accustomed enough to this process, know themselves well enough not to go way too overboard with whatever it is they're doing. It's a process for them. It's like breathing, or changing your car oil, taking a shit. Just gotta do it. INTJs are different. When their SE acts up to deal with their FI, or their FI is acting up in response to a lack of use or a misuse of inferior SE, they go crazy. Instead of taking a nice evening drive to relieve some stress, How about we dip into our savings, buy a motorcycle, and then drive 200 miles per hour in the middle of the night with the lights off? I've been feeling a little stressed lately, and I think I might hate myself, so I could go for a bit of binge eating, and maybe some meth. When an INTJ's FI goes beyond the pretty annoying to mildly crippling range, very bad things happen. Now, I shouldn't need to say this, but to be safe, FI is a valuable function. I have a series of videos on FI, and I am currently working through another one about the ways FI often has more emotional accuracy than FE does. Using practical examples, but I need to gather enough practical examples first. Now, all these points build into one of my favorite processes to watch and support: ISTJ FI processing. Alright, so we know from our SI videos, SI is ruminative, although I think ruminative sounds better. If SI is in your stack and higher than inferior, you are going to be spending a lot of time replaying events and minor details about those events in your head while feeling and refeeling what you felt then, amplified by what you know now. And sometimes these moments, these feelings, these flashes that haunt you over and over can be from decades ago, 30, 40 years ago, and they are often more emotionally intense now than they were then. And that degree of involuntary reflection is at the forefront of ISTJ's minds every single day. Now, SI as a function is more than just that data storage and involuntary replaying reflection, but to understand ISTJ FI processing, you need to understand that aspect of SI, how intense SI is on its own, and then how intense it must be amplified in the dominant position. Now we get to FI. I don't have FI, so I don't know how it feels, but I know how it looks. That INTJ hate myself example slash exaggeration earlier was not an accident. FI types can be walking around like everything is fine, and then, suddenly, snap, FI flares up and says, "You hate yourself." And not just an observation, as in you see a pattern of thought, but you're wrought with this realization. It's crushing. It seems to have come out of nowhere. It is now controlling you, and you're left to pick up the pieces. That's why, despite some issues with I would like to understand it so I can help fix it, because holy shit, that seems like a not very fun life. Randomly getting stricken with some shit that will mind break you for no reason. Just all of a sudden, now your shit's fucked up. And ISTJs, like INTJs, are dealing with that sort of FI in the tertiary position. Unlike ETJs, ITJs can't repress FI. ETJs can't either, but they aren't dealing with the worst of FI constantly. It's more like occasionally getting jumped. I mean, if you're an ETJ, you're always living with the threat of being jumped. It will be on your mind and will inform your actions, but you aren't getting your head kicked in every single day. And then FPs, although you can't 100% control FI, because FI is higher in their stacks, they are better at wielding it. So even if FI is getting unwieldy, they know how to make it work for them. They know how to get it under control, and they'll probably get some goodies out of it afterward. INTJs stare with their stupid faces into the middle distance for 3 years. A single tear rolls down their cheek, and then they catch on fire. Or, more realistically, INTJs spend years playing tug of war with something that isn't there and doesn't matter, only to realize once they've won, they're on the team they consider bad, and then they cry. We will figure out INTJs the way they want to be figured out one day. ISTJs, unlike all other FI types, are in a position in which FI is always on the brain, yet they lack the tools to manage it cleanly. They don't have SE, so they can't step out onto the balcony or stop and smell the roses to feel better. And they have inferior NE, meaning they cannot easily rejangle their brains the way NFPs can or even ESTJs can. How do you know what new information to find? And even if you decide you want to try to find new information or a new strategy for dealing with life, how do you know that'll even be useful? It'll be worth the time. Because if it isn't, things will have gotten worse quickly, and now you'll be in an even worse situation than you were before, and even less equipped to manage it. They find themselves in this situation. The strategy they've been using for however long is now, for no reason, making them miserable. They don't really want to make major adjustments to their lives because up until now, everything was working. So maybe they try to ignore it for a little while. But thanks to FI, the scenes and sensations they would normally occupy themselves with, structure their lives according to, are now making them miserable. They can't escape the constant stream of misery in their own heads. Images and sensations that used to bring pleasure are now bringing pain. Or images and sensations that used to make them sick still make them sick, except now, instead of thinking about them regularly, they are thinking about them constantly. They can't ignore it, and it's only getting worse. And Annie, the big red button, is sitting there the entire time saying, "You have to press me," knowing it's going to hurt, stress you out, and fix nothing. Now, that sounds like hell, and it is, but the reason I find ISTJs fascinating is once they engage any, they get driven so deep into a corner, they have to. They are interesting to watch, rewarding to support, and enlightening to study. They have decided to fight something they don't understand systematically. They're useful for studying FI, particularly for FE types, because they can identify what's wrong pretty quickly once they decide they want to, even if what's wrong doesn't make sense, especially to a TI mind. They will organize and explain a problem that bucks against organization and explanation. That's thanks to SI. Even if it doesn't make sense, they can precisely chart what's happening. Their explanations are thorough. And then they will work through their negative emotions, or push through them, rather, and put together a series of possible solutions. You get to hear their reasoning for what they think might work and why. Then you get to see what works for them or why not, and hear about it. And then you, as an FE type, get to be helpful. And the degree to which you get to be helpful is, again, pretty unique compared against other FI types. FPs don't really need you. ETJs want your help only once there's no other option. INTJs, well, they actually are pretty similar to ISTJs here, but the process is not organized, not thorough, not well explained. You can help them through the process if you want, and they might come to you for that help, but they have demon SI. You're not gaining ground, you're not losing ground. You're just dealing with the FI problem of the day, and that's exhausting. With ISTJs, it feels like you're helping them manage an internal construction or reconstruction project. Everything is neatly organized, and you almost certainly won't be retreading the same ground day after day once a strategy worked or didn't work. The ISTJ is getting somewhere systematically, and you see that, you feel it. You might be helping them with a different project next week, but you will not need to help them with the same project again. Unless something changes, but then it's a different project. So, quick summary. ENTJs try to manage FI by doing stuff, and they are pretty good at doing stuff, so for minor FI issues that works. INTJs manage FI by communicating with it until they can't, and then they blow up. ESTJs manage FI either by performing mental gymnastics and never growing because they don't need to, or by becoming the absolute pinnacle of the human race, performing all the information gathering, all the introspection, and all the self-work until they ascend to another plane of existence. And ISTJs manage the weight of their FI and SI in tandem by, after almost succumbing to the pressure, taking on small self-projects and fixing things piece by piece. If you're an FE type who wants to understand FI better, hanging around and helping out ISTJs might be a good route. FI still might not make sense to you, but you'll at least be able to see what's happening, because they will be able to put it into words and organize it. But that about rippity wraps this one up. I hope you enjoyed watching, because I certainly enjoyed making it. A bit of a mess and an anticlimax, but still have FI on the brain. Like if you enjoyed, because it helps me out a lot. Subscribe if you haven't, because we do this shit sometimes. And comment your thoughts, because I love hearing from you. What do you think about ISTJs, or FI, or something? But thanks again for watching, everybody. Really, we have a lot of fun on this channel. So much fun, in fact, you can slip them on your feet, and they will keep you warm. The funds will. Because they're warm, and fun is warm. And that's how much we have on this channel. And I look forward to doing this with you guys again in the future.